Thank you, Frank, and hello everyone. I'd like to acknowledge also the fact that we're on Gadigal land today, the Grass Tree people. Acknowledge their elders past and present, but also note too that I come to you today from where I live on Darramurrugal country too. I'm privileged to be and blessed to live on that land. So Australians and gambling. We're told that it's part of who we are as a nation. Betting on two flies, crawling up a wall, taking a punt on the race that stops the nation, playing two up on Anzac Day, harmless fun, the racehorses aside, generally speaking. But what we have now in Australia is a combination of capitalist greed and a moral and ethical vacuum that has spawned a multi-billion-dollar industry designed to identify and exploit those most vulnerable with ever more insidious ways and means, assisting them to lose their money as quickly as possible. One of the most startling and rapid developments in recent years has been the commodification of sport in Australia for the purposes of gambling. Peter V'landys, the chair of the Australian Rugby League, plans to launch the 2024 NRL season in Las Vegas next year.
Unbelievable.
In a surreal interview with the SMH this week, he said it was not about promoting the game in the United States, but providing Americans with a new wagering option. Rugby league is a tribal entertainment product, he told the Herald. What wagering does is add a little bit more entertainment onto the already fantastic product. I wonder how many people in Australia targeted by predatory sports betting agencies have now been entertained to death. A recent study in Victoria revealed that during last year's footy finals and spring racing carnival, 900 ads for sports betting companies aired on free-to-air television in Victoria every single day. The growing community outrage about the level of sports betting advertising in Australia is palpable. But sports betting accounts for much less than half of all gambling losses in Australia. There are the casinos and the plethora of inquiries into their links to organised crime. The Bergen inquiry into Crown Casino. The operator found not fit to hold a licence. The Finkelstein Royal Commission into Crown Melbourne. The operator found not fit to hold a licence. The WA Royal Commission into Crown Perth. Operator found not fit. The Star Inquiry in Sydney. Operator found not fit. The Star Inquiry in Brisbane. Not fit. Yet they are all still operating. Casinos also account for much less than half of all gambling losses in Australia. So on average, each year in Australia, $25 billion is lost to gambling. $13 billion of that is lost on poker machines nationally, and figures released by New South Wales Liquor and Gaming just 2 weeks ago indicate that in 2022, $8.1 billion of that was lost here in New South Wales. That's $1,000 per head for every man, woman and child in the state. New South Wales is home to 86,000 poker machines, second only to Nevada in numbers, but here they're just about on every street corner. As Drew mentioned, we're standing on top of about 20 to 30 of them right now. We still have poker machines here in New South Wales with load-up limits of $10,000, and with $10 bets every 3 seconds, you can lose most of that in 30 to 60 minutes. But load-up limits of that scale lend themselves nicely to money laundering. Load up 10K, play for a while and lose $100 or so, cash out the game and collect your cheque from the cashier for $9,900 in winnings. Done. In October last year, the New South Wales Crime Commission handed down its report into money laundering in pubs and clubs in New South Wales. It revealed annual turnover of over $95 billion through poker machines in New South Wales and concluded that billions of dollars being gambled was either the proceeds of crime or laundering the proceeds of crime. Drugs, human trafficking. Of course, the first recommendation Michael Barnes, the New South Wales Crime Commissioner, made in his report was that New South Wales should introduce a mandatory cashless gambling card that would be identity linked to a bank account, thus removing money laundering through the poker machines from the equation. But I'll talk a little bit more about cashless card later on. So why is Wesley Mission involved in this campaign? We talked a little bit about how in 1956 poker machines were legalised here in New South Wales for not-for-profit clubs. One of the few voices speaking out against that at the time was the Reverend Alan Walker. Now, this is a very youthful audience, So you probably won't remember Alan Walker.
Yes, we do.
He was the head of what was then known as the Central Methodist Mission, which is of course now the Wesley Mission. At the time, Alan Walker said these very prescient words: "Once these machines are introduced, we'll never get rid of them, and they'll destroy individuals, families and communities." Curiously, one of the other groups opposed to the introduction of poker machines in the clubs at the time was the pubs lobby, because they saw that as being unfair, as Drew mentioned. But of course that all changed on April Fool's Day in 1997, when the poker machines were legalised in pubs here in New South Wales. That was the day the music died. Other things that have sort of taken Wesley Mission on this journey. We set up the Lifeline telephone counselling service in 1963. Celebrated its 60th anniversary just last month. If you go to the Wesley Centre over on Pitt Street, you can see the 1950s Bakelite phone that took the very first call. We set up Australia's first gambling counselling service in the 1980s. And gambling reform now tops our advocacy agenda for a particular reason. A couple of years ago, after a change of leadership, I was charged with developing Wesley Mission's new advocacy agenda. And I spent several months talking to a lot of our frontline staff, identifying what they're seeing in their service areas, what's happening in the clients, where are the gaps, what could we do better. Gambling harm just appeared again and again, no matter what service area I spoke to. Obviously, services like Lifeline, gambling counselling, financial counselling, but gambling harm is also coming up all the time with our homelessness services, with our community housing services, emergency relief, out-of-home care, mental health programs, family preservation programs, and our community home care programs. When I did a straw poll of our staff, 50% of them indicated that they had a family member or a friend who had been harmed by gambling. So the scale of gambling harm in Australia is staggering. The Productivity Commission a decade ago estimated that for every person harmed directly by gambling, another 7 to 10 people are indirectly harmed. As a result of engaging with our staff, we developed 3 focus areas for our advocacy strategy: homelessness and housing affordability, suicide prevention and mental health, and thirdly, reducing gambling harm. Of the 3, gambling harm is our key focus. We have been working closely with the Alliance for Gambling Reform nationally at that level, but there was a gap here in New South Wales, and so we've decided to step into that. A couple of initial actions that we've taken part in over the last year and a half or so. Following the inquiries into Star and Crown here, there was a push to amend the Casino Act to include a number of amendments that would address not only the issue of connections to organised crime, but we were pushing very strongly too for measures that would address gambling harm and introduce measures to minimise harm. So a couple of amendments that we worked with the Crossbench and the Greens on last year, which we were able to get across, was included the introduction of a harm minimisation advisory panel that would be have members on who would have subject matter expertise in gambling harm, but also lived experience of gambling harm. The casino operators will be accountable to that harm minimisation panel every year to account for what they're doing to make a difference in terms of reducing harm. We've also had an amendment passed to introduce cashless gambling in casinos by 2024. But of course the big opportunity that loomed on the horizon over the course of last year was the fact that we're coming up to an election, and we had the opportunity then to sort of see how the degree to which we could make gambling harm an election issue for March 25. One of the first challenges was to prevent what would normally happen in the lead up to an election here in New South Wales, the Liberal National Party signing a memorandum of understanding with Clubs New South Wales, and the Labor Party issuing a clubs policy, both of which do the same thing and effectively gag any conversation about reform. Fortunately this time around, some intentional fortitude kicked in. The Liberal National Party did not sign an MOU with Clubs New South Wales, and the Labor Party did not introduce a specific clubs policy that would gag conversation about reform. On November 9 at Parliament House, we launched a campaign with 10 other initial partner organisations for a campaign called Put Pokies in Their Place. We had 5 particular asks that we put forward that we wanted people to act on, the government and the opposition to act on. We wanted to see them introduce an independent statewide self-exclusion register that would enable people to effectively exclude themselves from every poker machine in the state. Currently the system for self-exclusion is broken in New South Wales. You can only exclude yourself from a maximum of 36 venues, and you have to approach each venue individually to be able to do that. And then after you've done that, the venues won't enforce it. Second one was to power down pokies between midnight and 10 a.m. Some of the worst harm occurs in the early hours of the morning, where people have been drinking for a while, they're chasing their losses well into the early hours of the morning. Even the New South Wales Government's own research has indicated how extensive the amount of harm that occurs after midnight is. There is some of the venues licensed in New South Wales can be open until 6 a.m, reopening 3 hours later at 9 a.m. We also wanted local governments to have more of a say on poker machine applications in their areas. There is a very bizarre carve-out in the Planning Act, preventing local councils making submissions to New South Wales Liquor and Gaming about their concerns in this area. We want to see more transparency around the data that Liquor and Gaming are collecting as well, including venue-level data to assist with harm minimisation and prevention measures. Data at the moment that was released is only at the LGA level, with reporting periods different for pubs and clubs. The government used to charge people $300 to access this information, but the then Greens MP, Justin Field, paid the $300, started loading all the data up onto his website and releasing it for free. So now Liquor and Gaming are obliged to do that themselves. And of course, the main call we put out for was the introduction of a mandatory cashless gaming card with harm minimisation measures built in. So in the lead up to the election, we continued to build that coalition, building from initial 10 organisations to about 30 organisations now, NGOs and community service organisations, faith groups and unions. We also launched a separate campaign called Pokies, You're Being Played, which was for individuals to sign up and join the movement for reform. And today we've had about 1,500 members sign up there, highly motivated people who have been making themselves known to the new gaming minister over the last 2 weeks. And we're looking to have many, many thousands more people sign up to that movement as well. So in the lead up to the election, gambling reform and the cashless card became a key issue. Well, what does a cashless card actually do? Well, if introduced, it would meet Michael Barnes, the New South Wales Crime Commissioner's recommendation to reduce money laundering. It would effectively make that not possible. But also it would reduce gambling harm if it had a mandatory pre-commitments for how much money people would be prepared to lose at a given time. The Productivity Commission back in 2010 recommended a mandatory pre-commitment system. So that's how long that sort of idea has been moving around in policy circles. Andrew Rooke sought to bring in mandatory pre-commitment in 2012. The clubs back then campaigned against him and he lost the support of the Gillard government for those reforms. In Norway, they introduced a mandatory cashless gambling card a decade ago. It has been a massive success and significantly reduced gambling harm in their country. And there is a significant body of evidence now to demonstrate exactly how that happened. In 2021, the then Gaming Minister, Victor Dominello, called for a cashless gambling card. The club's lobby here in New South Wales didn't like that. The pressure was put on Dominic Perrottet and Dominello lost his portfolio, but not before leaving a time bomb. He had already put together the terms of reference for the New South Wales Crime Commission to undertake their investigations into money laundering in pubs and clubs. The Commission's investigation bubbled away in the background for 2 years before the findings were released in October last year. One of the interesting things too is that gambling has become more than just a single issue. It's become a little benchmark about the health of our democracy and the degree to which a particular lobby group can undertake state capture. The other thing we noticed during the course of the campaign too is that the focus has turned from problem gamblers, I use inverted commas for that term. It's a horrific loaded term promoted by the industry, inspired by the approach of the NRA in the US, to focus on the person as the problem, not the industry that's designing to harm them. Now we're focusing on the industry and how they operate. And things like work that Drew has done in his book has sort of lifted the lid on the way that the gaming machine manufacturers operate and the way they seek to create such addictive products. Focusing on the industry and their guilt in this process has also helped lift the veil of shame and stigma and empower people with lived experience of gambling harm to speak up and share their stories. I think the story in the Wentworth Courier this week has the story of one man, Tim Gray, who I've gotten to know quite well over the last few months. He got to the point where he almost took his life by driving his car into a tree when he owed $700. Kate Cecilia is another person I've got to know quite well over the last 12 months. Kate lost 12 years of her life to poker machine addiction. She's a mother of 6 children. When she was pregnant with her 6th child, she was contemplating taking her own life, but wouldn't do it because she couldn't think of a way to do it where her baby would survive. In the lead up to the March 25 election, both major parties launched reform policies. Both had good points to them, but both of them were significantly compromised as well. So the Coalition's compromise policy. Yes, they wanted to introduce a mandatory cashless gambling card, but they didn't want any mandatory pre-commitment levels. They had a political, philosophical objection to telling people what they can't and can do with their money. They had a 5-year implementation window for that card, kicking the can into the next term of Parliament. Plus, and this is the thing that really grated me the most, a $386 million rescue package for the industry. When I heard that, I was reminded of how the British government paid compensation to slave traders after banning the Atlantic slave trade. Then there was the ALP's compromise policy. They had some good elements, ending political donations from clubs, removing poker machine signage from outside pubs and clubs, introducing trained responsible gambling officers in venues, but no mandatory cashless card. Instead, a 500 machine trial to build an evidence base to make a decision later on. Well, the evidence is already in. We've seen what happened in Norway. The technology works. It prevents money laundering and reduces harm. A trial can easily be set up to fail. Who designs and oversees it? The industry? That's like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank. So, how do we shape up in terms of community opinions around this issue in the lead up to the election? In the lead up to the March 25 poll, YouGov polling indicated 76% support for a mandatory cashless gaming card from people in New South Wales. The issue was high on the political agenda, but was low on the list of issues that would influence people's voting intentions. Polling commissioned by the SMH revealed only 7% of people saying that the issue of gambling reform would influence actually how they would vote. So our question today is, who's afraid of a cashless card? The answer to that question is actually quite simple. It's anyone who stands to lose some of the massive profits they currently make from the misery imposed by poker machines on the people of New South Wales. The Australian Hotels Association and hotel chain groups like the Endeavour Group, Clubs New South Wales and the suburban pokie palaces too heavily reliant on poker machines. If what we've learned from the Crime Commission is true, pubs and clubs with poker machines have knowingly been profiting from the proceeds of crime, and a card would significantly reduce that income stream. A more interesting question for us to consider might actually be, who isn't afraid of a cashless card? Aristocrat Gaming and other poker machine manufacturers aren't afraid. If 86,000 poker machines in New South Wales need to be upgraded or replaced, there's a lot of money to be made doing it. Those businesses are also diversifying. Aristocrat's fastest growing business is the rapidly growing area of social casinos, smartphone games that are identical to their most well-known poker machines, but with one key difference. To play, you have to purchase online tokens, and the games don't allow the player to cash out their winnings, only keep in the game the tokens that they don't lose. Consequently, these so-called social casinos aren't classified as gambling and instead classified as games. They've been freely available to children and young people under 18, and like their non-virtual versions, they are addicting people, as they are designed to do, and causing harm. It emphasises the sad psychology behind poker machines that many people aren't ultimately playing to win, but to escape. Who else isn't afraid? The 44% of pubs in New South Wales who don't have poker machines and remain financially viable, they're not afraid. The 20% of clubs in New South Wales that have no poker machines and remain financially viable, they're not afraid. Like the wonderful Petersham Bowling Club, who dumped their poker machines 15 years ago and increased their profits by 800% in that time. The regular users of poker machines aren't afraid. Those being directly harmed by poker machines. Prior to the 25th March election, internal Liberal Party polling revealed that support for cashless gambling card was higher for more frequent poker machine users. 41% of people who used poker machines at least once a month supported a cashless card. Support rose to 65% for people who use poker machines at least once a week. These are people who want help. Those being indirectly harmed by poker machines aren't afraid either. We mentioned before that the Productivity Commission estimated that for every person directly impacted by gambling harm, there were 7 to 10 people indirectly harmed, equating in New South Wales to between 900,000 and 1.2 million people. They could do without cash-fed poker machines in the lives of their friends and loved ones. So where to from here? Parliament resumes this week, and the issue isn't going away. Here's what a poll of 1,000 New South Wales residents just 2 weeks ago revealed. 76% say poker machines are bad and require further legislation. 70% think the New South Wales government is not doing enough for poker machines and gambling reform. 63% don't think the new government is fully committed to addressing gambling harm. 66% say they have a colleague, a family member or a friend who has been harmed by playing poker machines. 63% think the new government should abandon plans for a trial of 500 machines and instead follow the New South Wales Crime Commissioner's recommendation for the full implementation of a cashless system. 71% believe the gambling lobby has too much influence on New South Wales politics. 64% believe the gambling lobby has too much influence on New South Wales Labor. 36% believe the industry, the lobby, has the strongest say on gambling policy in New South Wales, versus 25% for politicians, 23% for citizens and voters, and just 7.3% for reform advocates. 74% of people in New South Wales don't trust the government to stand up to the gambling industry. And 77% say they're more likely to visit a club if it didn't have pokies. If you asked me a year ago if poker machine reform would be as big an issue now as it is now, I wouldn't have believed you. At Wesley, we thought it would take us another 4 years to get where we are now. So let's see what the next 4 years have in store. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim, and again, thank you to Drew. I want to kick off the question and answer period with a bit of a focus on the political economic aspects. Surprise, surprise. In particular, raising the question about whether this gambling issue is a class issue. It's commonly portrayed as a problem for the working class. You know, people on low to middle incomes who gamble more than they can afford to lose. Is that true? And on the other side of the story, you might comment, for example, about in Sydney, whether it's a western suburbs issue or whether in areas such as here in the eastern suburbs, the problems, according to the statistics, are really quite comparable. But on the other side of the story, well, what about the interests, the powerful political economic interests involved here? It's of course the industry itself and its representation and lobbying through Clubs New South Wales that's most obviously in the spotlight. But what about the government and its dependence upon revenue from gambling taxation? I believe that's something of the order of 15% of New South Wales state revenue every year comes through gambling taxes, and presumably the lion's share of that is from the money going through the pokies. To what extent are those sort of political economic influences shaping outcomes? You refer in your book, Drew, One Last Spin, to a David and Goliath story, but you use that title mostly to talk about legal challenges. I'm just wondering if there's a bigger David and Goliath story here of a fragmented working class that actually doesn't have the power, even though there's a lot of political support for reform, taking on the big end of town and a government that's embedded in the proceeds through gambling taxation and of course through political donations to the major parties. I'll pass the microphone over to you, then when we've got the answers to this little puzzles, there'll be plenty of opportunity for further questions from the floor. Who'd like to go first? Okay.
I'll just speak briefly on the first point of of that question, Frank, regarding class. And it is true that working class communities, do gamble more, or like losses. The highest losses come from areas of social disadvantage. I mean, some people might like to frame that as people again being irresponsible and not knowing what to do with the little money that they have. I would strongly counter that and say that the reason that the losses are found disproportionately in areas of Sydney in particular that aren't as wealthy as others is because that is an industry tactic. Machines are concentrated in areas such as Western Sydney because the industry knows that they will be more profitable there, and the reason that the machines will be more profitable there is because one, people are, or more people are looking for a form of escape because of their life circumstances or challenging life circumstances. But another important point is that a lot of those communities don't have a wide range of facilities, or as wide a range of facilities as wealthier areas like the eastern suburbs. And if you visit, say, a area like Canterbury Bankstown, you'll find that a lot of the facilities that do exist, non-gambling facilities I should say, are either operated by or exist within clubs themselves, and so a lot of social activity is directed towards these gambling venues, and those gambling venues are designed to then direct people to the gambling part of those venues. I guess what I'm saying is it's important to look at those broader social structures that are in place that actually contribute to the losses within particular communities more so than others. And also it's in those parts of the city where the opening hours of venues are beyond kind of beyond sensible, as Jim was touching on. I mean, a lot of these venues will close for the minimum amount of time possible, 3 hours. And I have been to those venues at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there have been people waiting to get in to gamble before work, and that is addiction on display. That is one of the few moments that you will see that's one of the few moments that you'll actually see gambling addiction, because it's such a hidden form of addiction. There are no physical manifestations of it, as with substance addiction. It exists in mainly dark rooms and in the heads of those people who unfortunately are in the throes of it.
Just in terms of the degree to which the New South Wales government relies on gambling as a form of revenue, I think the New South Wales is looking at gambling taxation revenue of around $2.2 billion for the 2023 financial year. So not an insignificant amount of money. Dominic Perrottet, strangely, in 2023, April of 2023, said he would much rather the government not have any revenue from poker machine taxation. But that's obviously a gap that any government pursuing serious reform will have to address, much the same way as they did with tobacco revenues as well. And again, one of the things I think we need to do with this conversation is switch the lens to much more of a public health approach to gambling as a disorder, and treat it just the same way that we did with tobacco reform over many years. Just with regards to the influence of the gambling lobby, Clubs New South Wales obviously was one of the most powerful lobby groups in Australia. Very, very used to using political donations to buy access and influence, but also withdrawing support to punish non-compliant politicians as and when they see fit. We see that play out a number of ways over the last decade. But we've also seen, to some degree, that power waning. The decisions not to sign that MOU and launch the club's policy last year was a really important step. That gave us permission to start having conversations like this, and for politicians to be a little bit more brave about this. We saw the sacking of Josh Landis, the CEO of Clubs New South Wales. I think his board lost confidence in his ability to deliver on what he'd said he was going to be doing, which was maintaining a compliant government and opposition. That was starting to change. We had that strange situation on the evening of 25th of March. It was about a month or so after he'd been sacked, when Bevan Shields, the editor-in-chief of the Sydney Morning Herald, started receiving all these anonymous texts, expletive-laden texts about how he had lost the election and all those sorts of things for Perrottet, for the SMH's aggressive pursuit of the gambling reform issue. It didn't take some of Bevan's journalists in the Herald long to find out that the mobile number that those text messages was coming from was Kate Landis, Joshua Landis's wife. So that was interesting. But again, you know, I don't think Clubs New South Wales is an organisation that has a playbook based on what they picked up from the National Rifle Association in the United States. Again, I talked about how they use language that blames the problem gambler. They are the problem. It's just the few people who have a problem. It's not the industry itself and the way they operate in such a predatory manner. It is true that there is a class dimension to gambling harm in New South Wales. The LGAs most impacted are the lowest socioeconomic LGAs in terms of, you know, the CFA index and things like this. These are the people who are losing the most and can't afford to lose it as well. And this is compounded by the cost of living crisis. We're hearing stories in our services at Wesley about people who are gambling in the hopes of winning money to pay their rent and winning money to pay their grocery bills. These are people who are in desperate situations, and these venues are exploiting those people in those vulnerable situations. And again, it comes down to the ubiquity of the machines as well. You know, in the eastern suburbs, yes, there are venues with lots of machines, but in southwest Sydney, you know, when you cross over the latte line, you've got venues with, like, Bankstown Sports Club with 743 machines in it. That's not a club. That's a casino. You know, and that's a casino designed to have, you know, industrial level gambling taking place all the time and generating millions and millions of dollars of profit, sucking dry that community. These clubs, you know, the clubs movement in Australia, you know, they were set up by communities to serve communities. And now that model's been flipped. They've adopted this toxic business model where they now exploit the communities that they originally set up to serve. And that's just an utter shame. We need to break that.
Just picking up on your last point, when I interviewed the now president of the Petersham Bowling Club, George Catsey, he was recounting to me, you know, the story of how they got rid of their machines, and when George and his colleagues took over running the Petersham Bowling Club, which kind of happened by accident. They went to Clubs New South Wales for advice as to what to do to diversify their business model, and the advice of Clubs New South Wales was just to get new poker machines, which I think illustrates your last point of, you know, the flipping of what clubs were set up to actually be.
Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to ask any questions of our two experienced participants in this political process. So, who's going to be first? Maybe Hugh. Right out front.
Thanks very much, Frank, and thanks to the speakers. That was extremely interesting. First point is like a cultural, historical point. It's widely reported, and I think you may have said this, that Australia has the biggest gambling culture in the world, and that we lose more per capita than any other country in the world. So I was just wondering a little bit more on the history. I think it goes back to horse racing in the 19th century, and then of course the whole thing with, you know, the diggers and Two Up and So we sort of developed that whole culture of gambling, which seems to be ingrained. I don't know what we can do about it, but maybe a comment on that. The second point is, I admit to being an addict myself. I'm an addict of AFL football, and when I watch it, which I was starting to watch it before I came here, gambling ads are just rampant. I don't remember that this was the case a few years ago. The gambling ads are the main ads that are shown. You know, overtaking Maccas and all this sort of thing. I mean, has there been a massive increase in the ads for gambling on TV? I think there's another form of corruption that the advertising industry and the TV stations are completely sort of addicted to, or you know, require for their revenue. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that, please.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, on the culture of gambling in Australia, I resist that framing very strongly. I think that the idea that Australia has a unique culture of gambling is actually one that's been perpetuated by those who benefit the most from it, namely the gambling industry. And I think, or the gambling industry and, you know, their broader beneficiaries. And I think those historical points about, you know, 2Up and such, I mean, I think they've been picked up as a kind of marketing tool more than anything, that the effect of pushing this idea that there's a culture of gambling in Australia is, of course, to normalise it, right? But I just don't think that's the case. I think, you know, sure, we have the most losses, and that's often cited as evidence that we have a culture of gambling, but I think that's evidence that the gambling industry has been very successful at pushing its product here more than the kind of cultural element to it. And I think the fact that there is such broad public support for gambling reform is probably strong evidence that there isn't necessarily a culture of gambling in the kind of you know, broader nation. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's too.
Or it's changing.
or it's changing. Yeah. Your second question around ads. Yeah, recently there is there has been an increase in sports betting advertising on television. Well, somewhat recently, there was a High Court decision in 2008 that basically permitted gambling operators to advertise in other jurisdictions beyond where they were based, which in Australia, due to historical tax purposes, is mainly the Northern Territory. And that, following that decision, that was when the flood of gambling advertisements started. And yeah, I think you're right in your observation that broadcasters and sporting codes are now in a similar position as governments were in the 90s when poker machines were legalised, or a couple of years after they were legalised, in that they are now dependent on that revenue, or at least they think they are dependent on that revenue and can't separate themselves from it. And you saw that at the recent inquiry into online gambling, where TV representatives and representatives of the major sporting codes were advocating for the status quo and to not initiate any significant reforms that would decrease the amount of advertising. In their own words, they said that would make, you know, free-to-air broadcasting impossible.
I think some of those figures around changing community sentiment towards gambling in Australia come off the back of that latent anger in the community about the saturation level of advertising in sports betting. When I mentioned before that study that how there were 900 ads a day on free-to-air television in Victoria during the footy finals, that's just You know, you just can't escape it now. And when you're watching the game, you see the odds. The kids are watching; they see the odds. You know, I've read studies talking about how 25% of 16 to 18-year-olds are using sports betting apps while they're at school. You know, they bring them in young, and it's insidious. And again, it's no longer some of those. We talk about two-up. You know, two-up we play one day a year. You know, and it's a legitimate game of chance. But the sports betting algorithms and the way they utilise artificial intelligence now, you know, you can't just study the form of two teams and say, yeah, this one's looking good, this one's looking bad. If you win too much, they'll switch you off. If you're losing, they'll incentivise you to keep on losing. People are working very hard to make that the case. So it's an increasingly dangerous industry, and it's had a free rein in Australia for far too long.
Jim, could you please explain again how money laundering works with respect to the cashless cards? Or doesn't work?
So in New South Wales, we have poker machines with load-up limits of $5,000, $7,500 and $10,000. That means you can put that much cash into the machine up front to gamble with on the actual machine itself. It's a very slow and inefficient way of laundering money, but no one says that criminals are smart. This is the way that some of them choose to do it. I mentioned that with some of these $10,000 machines, you load up the machine, you gamble a bit, lose $100, you cash out the $9,900 remaining, you go to the cashier will issue you with a cheque that you can then put into your bank account as the winnings from that session of gambling. So that's how they're sort of using that as a method to launder money. I was actually going to bring a prop along tonight that was given to me by Troy Stolz, who is the independent candidate who ran in Cogger against Chris Minns. He was the whistleblower that kind of triggered the New South Wales Crime Commission inquiry. It's a money launderer's bag that he gave me. It's a black bag that was full of rubber bands from the wads of cash that had been inside it, and it's monogrammed with Clubs New South Wales on the outside as an incentive for that person to be using the machines.
Thanks. I just wondered about the political balance in the New South Wales Parliament, given that the government doesnn't have a majority in either house, and given that a number of prominent independents and the Greens have basically adopted the sort of policies that you're advocating for. What are the chances of getting some more change under this current term of government?
We have a really significant crossbench in the new New South Wales Parliament, about 9 members. We've got Alex Greenwich, we've got Joe McGurr, Greg Piper, we've got Helen Dalton, and then of course we've got the Greens as well. Between them, I've spoken to each of those people, and I know how in favour of some of these reforms they are. So I think we're in a good position where the Labor and minority government needs to negotiate with the crossbench now, and I don't think it's really a question of if we go into mandatory cashless gaming. It's a question of when now, and the degree to which Labor will be prepared in the short term to give up their trial of 500 machines and actually move to saying, yes, we'll do some pre-implementation testing, but we're going for a cashless card.
And would that require community campaigning as well?
Absolutely, yes. So it's one thing to have the crossbench pushing for reform, but I think it's also really important to give the ALP the courage it needs to be, the hero it needs to be for gambling reform in New South Wales, and that's going to involve grassroots mobilisation of people, contacting MPs, electorate officers, pushing for reform and not letting people fall asleep on this one.
Can we have a rally outside Parliament?
Yeah, g'day, Brian Concannon. 2 quick questions. First one, slightly off topic. Ban the jobs, halt the jobs. The data is overwhelming, they're doing way more harm than good. Albo and the state premiers are under Pfizer Big Pharma control. Shame. On topic. Yeah, I used to dabble with the machines myself. After work on a Thursday, we'd go up the pub, and I was a responsible gambler myself, thank God. Had a family and stuff. But mate of mine, like he'd get carried away, he'd just throw in 50 after 50. Occasionally he'd have a win, but if he didn't, he'd lose his pay packet on the day, over $1,000, bang, gone. I watched his marriage deteriorate. He had 4 kids, and over the months, she kicked him out and got him back again, and eventually he was gone. Had a divorce, split up. And a friend of my dad's, my late dad's, his wife had a problem. She wasn't paying the bills. She was losing on the pokies and covering it up for him. Went on, and he complained, "Where's the money?" Next thing, she took an overdose of pills and alcohol and passed away. So there's a lot of harm being caused by these machines. I'm just wondering, like, has there been any lawsuits, class action suits? Like, the grounds are there. If not, why? What's...
Thank you. I think that brings us back to the David and Goliath situation.
There was a lawsuit a couple of years ago, led by Shonika Guy, who had suffered from a gambling addiction for many years. She was represented by Maurice Blackburn and took Crown and Aristocrat to court for misleading and deceptive conduct. So not so much a class action based on kind of the harm, but the kind of marketing of poker machines themselves. That lawsuit unfortunately failed for Shonika. I actually sat in on a lot of that case, and the way I saw it, unfortunately, it failed in large part because of the expert evidence that was presented during the trial, which was to any observer in the courtroom, let's say, somewhat underprepared, and the industry or Aristocrat and Crown were able to pick it apart with much ease, and for those who were delivering it, much embarrassment. Whether there will be similar cases like that moving forward, I would be surprised if there wasn't similar cases like that. Although it takes a lot of money, unless well, I mean, even if a company, even if a law firm is willing to take it on pro bono, there's still kind of costs involved, and more importantly, the kind of emotional energy and knowledge of, you know, the kind of targeting and kind of attacks that will occur on one's person if you're leading that charge, as Shonika found out.
Could you ever see a class action suit getting up if it was prepared the right way?
Would it get up? I don't know. I think it could, based on what's known about the industry and its tactics. Now, I mean, I document some of them in my book, and others have documented them as well. There's, I mean, it's similar tactics as the tobacco industry. It's known within the industry that the machines cause harm. That was known 30 years ago, and they speak openly about that. There are documents detailing that. So on that basis, yeah, I think there's a possibility that a class action could get up.
And I think if we do start applying that public health lens to gambling harm, and we do look at the precedents from what happened with the tobacco industry, I think there really is a genuine opportunity for class actions of the type we're talking about in the future. But obviously, you know, Shonika's case is a tough one, I suppose. But yes, mobilising groups and resources, then yes, is a possibility in the future.
Excellent. Time for one last question. John.
Yeah, my name's John Wilkinson. I used to work in the research service at the State Parliament many years ago, and in 1996, when I was just checking on the web, the publication is still there. I produced a publication called New South Wales and Gambling Revenue, and in the course of doing that, I found an article in an American academic journal on the qualities that a worker should have, thinking of workers of gambling, that would be best for them in a situation where a nation fully functioned according to economic principles. That is, that the commercial sector delivers services best, the government should stay out of things at least as far as it can, that workers should only ask for wage rises, that don't interfere with companies making maximum profits, all those things. If all those things are running, what would be the best virtues that a worker could possess? And the writer said thrift. The thing that a worker needs most is thrift. And it seems to me that that opens a political angle or a political basis on which both the Liberal and National Party and the ALP could be challenged, because both claim that they want to operate on economic principles. We want to do everything by economics. It should work by economic principles. So why are they being so staggeringly hypocritical as to undermine and corrode thrift when that's one of the very principles that economists say is best for workers? I just cannot believe this myself, you know. And I just wondered what you would make of the possibility of political critics of governments and gambling using that as one way to attack.
I mean, I think that has been used as one form of attack, and a form of encouragement for governments to reform. But like other forms of attack, it hasn't worked. And I guess the reason it hasn't worked goes back to what we've been talking about today. One being the power of the gambling industry, their ability to assert influence on political parties, albeit a waning influence these days, it seems. To the kind of attitude that exists within the halls of power, which you also see in the broader community as well, which is one of gambling being part of Australian culture. So let's just kind of run with it. And I guess like polling showing that only 7% of people would be influenced by gambling reform in their voting in the recent New South Wales election. I mean, for a government or for a political party that is only hell-bent on getting votes, then why would they run with this reform? But of course, governments shouldn't only be in the business of getting votes. They should be in the business of caring and supporting for their communities that they represent. And I don't know, from an advocacy standpoint as well, do we want to frame our argument only in economic terms? I mean, to me that's somewhat dismissive of that all of the non-economic aspects to this story. And I kind of on that as well, the recent let's say enthusiasm for gambling reform in New South Wales comes primarily from the Crime Commission's report about money laundering, which when I read that, I part of me was pleased to see that reforms were back on the political agenda, but another part of me was sad that it took this report, this Crime Commission's report, to initiate those reforms within, within the government here, because it was saying we won't permit the influence of crime in poker machines, but we will permit the influence of massive social harm, of which there is far more evidence than the Crime Commission provided of money laundering. There is 30 years worth of evidence. Now I get that that report is, that report makes it very difficult for the industry to, or the industry can't really argue against that. And from a political perspective, if you're in government, then that makes sense to use as your main launch pad into a discussion of these reforms. But again, it upsets me to know that it took that report and evidence of crime over evidence of social harm to get this topic on the agenda.
So you're looking into the harm caused by poker machines was sort of outside of the remit of the Crime Commission in their terms of reference. They did, however, receive testimony in closed session from people with lived experience of gambling harm. So that did help shape the context into which they were obviously going to speak to with their final report and recommendations. I think one of the other challenges that we've had with the government too is that they've fallen for the club's PR smokescreen over many years of the community value that they provide, putting money back into the community, the subsidised meals, the soccer jerseys for the under sevens, all these sorts of things. It is a smokescreen. It is a PR smokescreen. The clubs in New South Wales are obliged to return no more than 2% of what they earn to the community, and much of that is returned to them in refunded through tax as well, through tax incentives. So really, there's very little benefit to the community, and the government has just fallen for that over many years, and we all have too. We all thought that was the way things worked, but the reality is that the community benefit provided by clubs is negligible.
I'm going to just address your question, John, too, by way of conclusion, because it seems to me getting to those political economic issues of what constitutes a good economy, what constitutes a good society, is the broader context in which this debate sits. My short answer to your question would be, well, that's capitalism. Capitalism has never been about thrift and productive investment. It's been about making profits, and if encouraging people to consume is more conducive to economic growth, capital accumulation and profits, well, that's what becomes the top priority in the system. In an ideal world, we wouldn't do those kind of things, but under capitalism, it's those material economic drivers and the vested interests that are the most powerful players shaping outcomes. But even by those standards, it seems to me the lesson I take away from the presentations we've heard is that this is a sick form of capitalism, even by capitalism's own standards. This is a sort of a dysfunctional process. It's causing people not to engage in more buying of products, tangible goods and services, but putting their money down the slots in order to stand some possible chance of major windfall gains that are going to transform their lives, but in most cases have exactly the reverse effects and are harmful to mental and physical health, to family breakdown, and ultimately to governments too, because the health services to some extent picks up the tab for meeting the costs of that social malaise. So even by capitalism's own standards, it seems to me that there's dysfunctional elements here, and one would look towards governments that recognise those characteristics and would implement reforms in conjunction, of course, with community movements, such as we've been hearing about, that say it's really overdue time for action now before this gets even further out of hand. So I want to thank you, both of our wonderful speakers today, Rooke and Jim Wackett, for helping us to navigate this territory and get a deeper understanding of the challenges that face us around the questions of POCI reform and cashless credit cards. Thank you very much. Join me. Just to wind up,